Welcome to another episode of Conductive Conversations. In today's episode, Paul Yeh, the co-founder and managing director of Conductive Ventures, speaks with Stephen Hong, the co-founder and CEO of Oculii, a high-density radar startup. Stephen talks about growing up in Ohio, Oculii's origin story, and ultimately, why he decided to sell his company in the $400 million all-cash deal to Ambarella, a publicly traded semiconductor company. In this episode, we dive deep into his entrepreneurial journey, co-founding his company with his dad, and the highs and lows of his path as what he called being an accidental entrepreneur. We hope you enjoy it.
I'm thrilled today to be interviewing Stephen Hong. Not only is he our first podcast guest, but he's a dear friend, a repeat entrepreneur, two-time entrepreneur, and one of our first and most successful investments. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Paul. It's a great honor to be here.
That's great. Stephen, I'll try to do a quick intro here, but I will also want to let Stephen do a lot of his own description on what he lived through. Stephen has quite a long list of achievements. He's the co-founder of Oculii. He joined Ambarella through a $400 million all-cash acquisition to Oculii back in November 2021, and we are now the VP and general manager of the autonomous unit. Before that, Oculii raised more than $80 million, including money from Conductive Ventures. Before that, actually, you were a partner at Kleiner Perkins. That's where we had the pleasure of working together and brought you into the firm. Even before you became a VC, you were a founder at Kumu Networks. You started your career at McKinsey, but before that, you were also a PhD, actually one of the youngest PhDs to finish master's and PhD in EE at Stanford at the age of 23 years old. You are a proud Wolverine for going to University of Michigan, and you grew up in Ohio. All right, let's start at the beginning. So can you tell us how did it all start? When you were growing up in the Midwest, did you always want to be a founder? Did you always, raise your hand and say, I'm going to be a PhD. I want to start my own company. What was that journey like?
Yeah, it was, I think, a long journey to become an entrepreneur. I don't think I started off as a kid knowing even what entrepreneurship was. I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Beaver Creek, and it was a great place to grow up. Really safe, really normal. And I would say that I probably had the typical '90s kid experience growing up. Played a lot of Nintendo. Watched a lot of Power Rangers. But I wouldn't say anything in particular about my childhood really stood out about becoming an entrepreneur. My biggest inspiration as a kid was actually my father, who was a first-generation immigrant who came to the U.S. with, nothing but a suitcase and $10 in his pocket. And as a child, seeing the life that he built for us and the opportunities that he provided, he was my biggest role model, my biggest inspiration. And so, as a kid, I wanted to be like my father. And my father was a professor. He came to the U.S. to do his PhD and then became a professor at a school called Wright State University. That was why we were in Ohio, actually, because he moved to Beaver Creek to take a faculty from there. And as a kid, I'd say that was kind of our world. My father exposed us to a lot of the research that he was doing. He was doing a lot of research in sensors, in drones, in autonomy. I remember as a kid, going to his lab, going to his office, spending time with, the grad students in his lab. I wanted to be a professor and I wanted to be like him. And so when I went to college initially, I knew that I wanted to study electrical engineering and go be a professor like my father, but that was kind of the only path and the only journey that I knew because I had seen him go through it. It wasn't until I went to graduate school, and it was actually a little bit accidental. I originally applied to dozens of schools for my PhD program, got into several actually, and had a little bit of a tough choice on where to go. Ultimately decided to choose Stanford, mostly because of the weather and the great environment out here. But it actually ended up being a really great blessing in disguise, because when I got here, I was dead set on becoming a professor, just like my father. But the entrepreneurial spirit and environment at Stanford was incredible. Actually, of the lab that I was in, I think we had probably 11 or 12 students. Almost all of the students went on and became great entrepreneurs as well. And so it was really the pure set, the great folks around that environment that inspired me to become an entrepreneur. I always say I'm kind of the accidental entrepreneur, but that really was kind of my first foray into entrepreneurship, was coming to Stanford, seeing that culture there, and then going off and starting my first company with my advisor and some of my lab mates.
You have actually spoken about growing up in Midwest in Ohio, and I spent about 4.5 years in the Midwest as well. So I understand the culture is a little more different, where probably a little more risk averse. Did you have that growing up in the sense of your parents pushing you one way? And again, as a first generation immigrant for your parents and, second gen for you, was it tough to take that entrepreneurial route, even though you came to Stanford, and not follow your father's footsteps of going back to the Midwest and becoming a professor?
Yeah, no, definitely. It was, I think for me, going on this discovery of what it meant to be an entrepreneur was, something that was really exciting, but also really, really foreign and new. Like you mentioned, I think growing up in the Midwest, the culture around entrepreneurship is not as strong, but I think coming from an immigrant family, I think the definition of being an immigrant is to be entrepreneurial, right? Like I mentioned, I think my parents came to this country with nothing, but they knew that it was a great opportunity that would allow for them and their kids to have many more chances to be successful and to pursue what they wanted to pursue than they would have had back in China in their home country. And so I think that entrepreneurial spirit was always in my mother and father's DNA. And I think although they didn't explicitly raise us to be entrepreneurs, us seeing how they navigated this new world, how they navigated, being immigrants in, a place like Ohio in the Midwest where there aren't a lot of immigrants, right? We did kind of stand out as kids growing up. I remember, we were quite unique in the sense that there wasn't a large Asian population in Beaver Creek in Ohio when we grew up, and although we felt different, we also felt like I felt like we were special because we had this different heritage and different background that gave us a lot of different perspectives. And actually, even going back to my younger days, a lot of my best friends also were the children of other professors at the university. And the professors actually happened to come from all different walks of life and backgrounds as well. So there were a lot of immigrants amongst that community. And the interesting thing was, I think we all developed kind of like our small communities around that. And some of my best friends actually, to this day, all became entrepreneurs as well. So, actually looking back, although we were never explicitly raised to be entrepreneurs, I think just seeing our parents and how they navigated the early days of being immigrants, I think that really inspired all of us. And it was just one of those things where I think the journey kind of all led us to similar places.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think one of the mantras that Carrie and I, when we founded the firm, Carrie is a second generation immigrant. I'm a first generation immigrant from Taiwan coming to US when I was 11 years old. I love what you said about immigrants as entrepreneurs, because we find very much similar traits in terms of the scrappiness, the fact that there's not much to go back to. We have to make it work. And what we love about it was also, these are the people that we love to back, even though they're very non-traditional, unconventional founders, who didn't go to all the top schools, top universities, didn't get their degree from, the MITs, the Harvard, Stanford of the world. Their scrappiness is something that is just, you can't really teach that. It's just innating them, which we love. Oh. And as the evidence of that is actually over 50% of our portfolio companies are started by first or second generation immigrants, which we're really proud of. Definitely. One of the things that I want to also talk to you about was, you mentioned after Stanford, you joined your professor and started Kumu Networks. Tell me a little bit more about that company and the fundraising you had to go through, because I know you raised money at that at Kumu Networks as well.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, that was kind of my first off ramp from the path of becoming a professor. And again, it was just this really accidental thing because I didn't set out to go to Stanford to become an entrepreneur. I actually went there, as I mentioned, to become a professor. But that decision to want to become a professor is kind of what set me up, I think, to have success in my entrepreneurial career. When I went to Stanford, I was actually my advisor, Sachin Kadi's first student. So that in and of itself was a little bit entrepreneurial because I think, when you join a new professor, a fresh professor, you're kind of figuring it out with him as he goes along as well. And so, being one of his first students was this amazing opportunity where I got to kind of learn with him as he was growing as well. And today he's a very successful professor with lots of successful students. And I think a big part of it was he spent a lot of time with us and a lot of time with me personally, mentoring me, teaching me, how to do great research, how to think, out of the box and think ahead to where the world was going and how to solve real problems, and how to communicate it as well. So I learned a tremendous amount from him and at Stanford. But I still remember I was a third-year PhD student. And our research at Stanford had really been focused on interference cancellation and adaptive wireless intelligent systems that could survive in a world of increasingly dense, electronic interference in environments. And it was something that we were pursuing, not just because it was a great academic project, but because there were real commercial use cases for our technology. And I remember, in my third year, I didn't expect it, but we had been publishing a lot of papers. The papers were getting a lot of great traction. We had been winning some awards for our research. And one day he came to me and said, "Hey, I think we should do a company out of the research." And along with a couple other students in the lab and another professor, we decided to start Kumu Networks. And the funny story here is initially he said, I think you should drop out to go do this company with us. And I remember going back and talking to my parents about this opportunity. And my father, had this look on his face. Actually, back then there weren't video calls, but I could just hear the look on his face on the phone. He said, "Drop out? Like, you can't drop out. You have to finish your PhD." And so I remember going back to Sachin and telling him, "Hey, my dad said I can't drop out. He says I have to finish the PhD." And Sachin, took a look and said, "Well, you actually have quite a few publications because you've been preparing to be a professor. What if we just graduated you early and we did the company?" And I remember, I was like, "Is he really saying this?" I just remember that being just kind of like this great opportunity that Sachin presented to me and gave me the chance to take, and be really grateful for it. And that was kind of the first foray where I said, "Yeah, definitely, I'll take this journey." And I actually, when we talked about it with Sachin and the other professors, my original plan was to go work on the startup for a couple years, and then actually come back and maybe do a postdoc with him or with somebody else, and then continue on the journey to being a professor. But I just had so much fun doing the company, so much fun, like you mentioned, meeting other folks outside of the academic network, raising money, building the company, hiring great folks, building a commercial product that after that, you guys were the next call. I never really considered going back to being a professor after that. But I do think that had it not been for Sachin and the opportunities that he presented me coming out of Stanford, if I had gone to another university, had another advisor, I probably would be a professor today. And so, I'm really grateful to that opportunity.
Fascinating to talk about that story. It's really always fascinating to hear how every person started their original entrepreneurial journey. The next call, like you mentioned, it's actually before we recruited you to Kleiner. You were actually fundraising for Oculii already at that time. Yeah. And I remember the company, when you brought it in, it was a very specific radar for speed guns that you were selling to highway patrols, freeway, different police departments, and everything. And at that time, I know you were already helping your father, who was the founder of Oculii. And you were doing both startups at the same time, and you were straddling so many things, right? So what was that like? Because part of it, I'm sure your dad was probably already calling you and say, "Hey, son, come back to work with me," and you were deciding between the two startups, and later on, we also called you to say, "Hey, you want to be a VC?" What were all the decision points in your mind? Hey, should I continue my original startup? Should I go and join my father? Should I go to Kleiner Perkins and do venture? Such a very different choices.
Yeah, no, it was, looking back now, it was this really hectic kind of, moment in my life. So just to rewind a couple of steps, I had been working, with my professor on Kumu for 3, 4, or 5 years after graduation, including the, several years of our PhD research. So almost a decade trying to commercialize our full duplex, interference cancellation technology. And my father at the time, this was back in probably the early 2010 period, had also started to think about commercializing his research from his university as well. So there was this kind of period where it was actually kind of fun because for many years, my father had been such a great mentor to me. And I think one of the reasons why I was successful as a PhD student and on that path to being a professor was because he had walked down that path already and been on that journey. And so he really knew how to guide me and navigate me and teach me about how to be successful on that journey. And so in the 2011, 2012 period, my father actually, this whole time while he was a professor, he'd been doing a lot of research for the military as well, right? Patterson Air Force Base is actually the largest Air Force research laboratory. It's based in Dayton, Ohio, about 15 minutes from Wright State. So he worked with the Air Force for many, many years. And he'd actually done a lot of consulting work outside of the university for a company that he had called Ambarella at the time. And the company that he had was mostly doing non-commercial work for a lot of academic research for Wright-Patterson, but he reached a point where the lack of commercialization of his technology was actually impacting his ability to get new grants. So he was actually compelled by the fact that he wanted to get more grants, but needed some commercialization aspect to actually start looking at some use cases. And because his research was all in radar, sensor fusion, a lot of perception technology, he started looking at where he could apply this. And in Ohio, the interesting thing about Ohio is that there are tons of policemen on the side of the roads catching you for speeding, and they're very strict about your speeding. If you're 5 miles per hour, they'll still give you a speed ticket. There's so many cops everywhere. And actually, funny anecdote here: when I was a teenager growing up, I probably got like 5 speeding tickets in just a couple years of living in Ohio. Actually, after I left Ohio, I haven't gotten any. But that just kind of goes to show you how many police there are in Ohio giving out speed tickets. So, anyways, my father, us growing up in Ohio, he had seen all these policemen on the side, and with his technology, he thought, hey, maybe I can help those policemen. Maybe I can automate some of their jobs with my technology. And so that was kind of the application use case he focused on initially for Oculii, commercializing the radar perception technology into catching people speeding. And he had reached out to me just because, I'd been doing Kumu and commercializing a lot of this technology to help him with some of the product ideation, help him with fundraising as well. So for many years at Kumu, I'd been doing, my full-time thing at Kumu, but then in the evening helping him. That was actually how I met you and the Kleiner folks originally. I came and pitched. And it was one of those things where initially when I was helping my father, it was just doing it because, I think the perspective that I lent was a different perspective than he had coming purely from a research background. And we had some of that experience already at Kumu, commercializing the new technology, finding out who the initial customers were, raising the initial capital and scaling the business. And it was kind of the first time in my life where, I wasn't just asking my dad for help and relying on him, but it was kind of the roles were reversed a little bit. And so I still remember there was a period in which my father was not sure if he wanted to continue the business, particularly because the Oculii business was essentially bootstrapped from day one. And you mentioned the scrappy entrepreneur. That's really where the DNA comes from. Like you said, it's the immigrant mentality, got to make every dollar stretch as far as it can to be as efficient as possible because you never know where the next dollar is coming from. We definitely had that, from day one at Oculii, just because of the background of my father and also the environment that we were in Ohio. Venture capital and things like that were not nearly as accessible as it is here in Silicon Valley. But luckily, we were able to marry his research and his great technology with my experience and my network out in Silicon Valley. And actually, you were one of the first folks that I pitched. And your feedback actually really helped change the trajectory of the company, because I remember when I met with you and the folks at Kleiner, you gave me a lot of great feedback. But then I remember one thing that you said that stood out, which this is not a great market, right? This is not a market where you can build a defining business, right? And I remember after that meeting going back and thinking, Paul was right. This is something that we can continue to bootstrap on and generate, maybe some revenue that we can stay profitable on, but this can't be a billion-dollar business, right? This can't impact billions of people and create tons of value for everybody. We're catching people speeding, right? So, that's a different type of value than helping people solve a problem that they have, right? Where we might be adding more problems. Yeah. So that actually made us kind of go back to the drawing board and consider what else can we do with the technology. And that's actually how we pivoted into automotive, which at the time in 2013, 14, and 15 was becoming a very, very lucrative and hot sector, particularly with autonomy just taking off. But I really credit your feedback, even on the early days, for helping us kind of rethink, is this really the business that we want to build for a decade? And yeah, that was, even before we worked together, already great feedback that you provided. So.
Thank you for saying that. I think I still remember the first time when we met. You had just come from a workout and you came in shorts, t-shirt, to the Kleiner's building. And I always thought that was funny. But it's definitely out of the norm when it comes to pitching. It didn't matter, but the technology that you described, a little bit of a joke. I remember why I gave you the feedback was, I said, hey, me and the other partner of the Kleiner, a lot of us are car guys. If we invest in this technology, we're only creating more problems for ourselves, getting caught for speeding, etc., for 5 miles over, totally. God forbid. But coming back to it, I remember the feedback was very specifically, hey, this is a long sales cycle. The market is probably fairly small. Technology was really, really impressive, especially the way that you were able to miniaturize such a powerful radar into something that is handheld at the time. So I always thought that was really good potential, but the market was a feedback that I provided you. I'm really glad you still remember that. And to be honest, the another thing that you said, when we evaluated the team from the Oculii perspective at that very first time, there was a lot of questions, I would say, from the traditional firms, always having a lot of questions around, do we back, parent, child, sibling, spousal kind of founders? And a lot of times they go wrong. There are just so many times where it's hard to take off that personal hat and put on the professional hat, or the arguments go and continue in the bedroom if their spouse that are founders. So one of the things that was really really tough for a lot of the traditional San Diego Row VC firms, it's just that, hey, that's a very big unknown. But for Conductive, we always saw it as very positive, because we say, hey, these are the closest people you can share everything with. This is the synergy, because now you don't even need to say what you need to outline, and the other person already knows exactly what you're thinking about. And if you can harness that energy, and it'll be a very, very easy investment. So as such, we actually have several investments, our husband and wife teams, father, son, etc. I actually wanted to, before we go back to the Kleiner story, take a quick segment, because you did talk a lot about your father, and he was a professor at Wright State University, but he also co-founder at Oculii. Talk a little bit about what was it like working with your father? What was it like working with a family member What was it like being so close, growing up, obviously looking up to him, and then later you may have to say, Dad, that's wrong. How did that all go about?
It was an amazing experience. And actually, like, looking back on the journey, I think I'm so grateful that our timelines lined up and that we were able to work together. I think, when in your 20s and early 20s, you're not quite yet mature enough to be able to really work with your father. I think, in those years, I would have been a lot more rash in my communication and decision making, and also not capable enough to really contribute as much as I did later on. And then had we waited till maybe now, my father's now in his 60s. I don't know if he would have had the same passion and energy that he would have had in his 50s. And so our timelines lined up perfectly, and there was this window in which, we had great synergies in terms of backgrounds, in terms of perspectives, in terms of expertise. But like you said, it all started fundamentally and foundationally with the close relationship that we had. And so, like you said, it's a double-edged sword sometimes to work with family members. Things that happen in the office, sometimes they're best left at the office. But I think when you work with family members, what's nice is that even if you have a tough discussion at the office that you disagree on, at the end of the day, there's a lot of love, a lot of trust, a lot of mutual respect and admiration that underlies the relationship that makes it a lot easier to get over any disagreement about anything. And, talking about that with my father, it actually, when we first started working together, one of the toughest decisions for us to make was actually what to do with the business. Because as I talked about earlier on, he started the business originally focused on speed enforcement. And that was a business that he and the team had built over several years of really hard work, really, to, commercialize the technology. They had, dozens of customers, a couple million in revenue. It was a real business, but it wasn't a great business, right? And so I think when I first started helping him in 2013, 2014, and providing the type of feedback and relaying it from, folks like you, the initial discussion was, well, we're not automotive people. We don't know how to get in that industry, and that market's too big, right? Like it's too competitive. We should stick to what we're good at, right? We should play it safe, right? And at the beginning of our relationship, that was probably one of the first forks in the road that we came to that we really had to work together in order to solve. And I still remember a lot of these conversations were hard because we came at it from different perspectives and from different vantage points of what would be the most valuable path moving forward. And I think at the end of the day, we wouldn't have been able to make that decision as seamlessly and smoothly if the two of us didn't have the close personal relationship and trust that we had, right? If I think I was a hired gun, he might have thought, hey, this guy doesn't, know what he's talking about. Like we've done this, or he's got a separate agenda to take us down this different path, right? But I think because my father knew that, my primary motivation was to help him and the company be successful in whatever way I could, even if we had a disagreement on how that was done, he trusted my intentions. He trusted, my capabilities, and that I think eventually led him and the team to being open to the idea of pivoting into automotive, considering other use case and applications, investing in that, and then ultimately having a completely different company than we would have had we stayed on the path towards just selling solutions for speed enforcement. So
That's a great point. I want to go back and rewind a little bit to when we actually gave you a call and asked you to join Kleiner Perkins. I still remember at that time, 2017, my partner Carrie asked me to start Conductive Ventures with him. And after I decided that was what I wanted to do, I had a conversation with the former general partner at Kleiner Perkins, Wen. And Wen actually said, Paul, you cannot leave until you find your replacement. So I remember looking at him and say, okay, fine, I will do that and help you find the best person. One of the things I always call it made me such a, it made me remember you so much was, again, you were super sharp, super bright, but you were also very, very open to getting feedback and learning. I was able to call it, luckily, if you will, you have that interaction and detect that you were just yearning for knowledge. You were just wanting to learn so much, always raising your hand. And I love that quality about you. Now, in terms of when we gave you the call, you had multiple options. And when we say, hey, come in, be a partner at Kleiner Perkins, what intrigued you or what interested you enough to say, you know what, let me try out the investment side versus just staying the entrepreneur side? Because again, it's very different from anything you've done up to that point.
Yeah. No, again, it was all a matter of timing and luck as well. So around the time when I had gotten the call from you guys, what was actually, really fortuitous at the time was that we had actually signed an LOI to have Oculii be acquired as well. And so the timing, at least in my mind, had worked out perfectly because, I'd been working on Kumu for about 6 years at that point, and we had just raised our Series C. So company was in a great spot, really good time for me to take a step back and hand it off to other folks that were growing the business. Oculii had actually just signed an LOI that I helped negotiate. I was really proud of it. I was like, deal's going to be done, sold the company. And to join you guys at Kleiner, in my mind, was this great transition to kind of get a little bit of a breather from the startup world. I think when you're an entrepreneur, you've got blinders on, and you have to, because you're so focused on the task at hand every day. It's all about execution. You really live and breathe your startup. You don't see anything else. And what really excited me about becoming an investor and becoming a VC and working with you guys was that as an investor, you're kind of 10,000 feet up in the air, but you see everything, right? Because of your vantage point, you see different industries, you see different businesses, you meet different entrepreneurs, you meet great executives, you meet great strategics that can help your companies. So you get this great perspective and this great network that you can then leverage into something else if that's your choice as well. And so that was kind of my mindset. I was like, I'll go to, Kleiner for a couple of years, think of another great idea, and then, do another company. And I remember our former boss at the time, because at the time, my wife was actually doing her MBA. He told us when we were negotiating for the role that I had to pay him to work for him because I was going to learn so much from him. And it really was true. And I was so lucky in my career to have all these great mentors. I think I definitely put Wen in that category, who took me under his wing for several years while I was at Kleiner, taught me so much, showed me a lot of the different things about being a successful entrepreneur, learning from great folks like you and Ruse, who happened to be our later investors as well. It was just this great opportunity. And I personally think, had I not gone to Kleiner and spent those years with you guys, I wouldn't have had the experience and the perspective necessary to build Oculii into a great company, because I think that experience and that perspective has to come from somewhere. And in many times it comes from, folks outside your network. It comes from mentors. It comes from, board members. It comes from great investors that have seen these different opportunities play out in different ways and can kind of shepherd you on that journey. So I'm really grateful that you guys called and gave me that opportunity. And I'm also really glad that the timing worked out, where I thought I was going to just be a full-time VC and focus on that. But, life had other plans. So.
Well, let's skip to that really quick. That's actually really awesome to hear you winning with the right mindset. I love that. Now, what was it about the second time around, if you will? Now that you being in Kleiner, you started Kumu, you were helping your father on getting the LOI for Oculii, and then what happened? Because you obviously decided to go back, rejoin Oculii, become the CEO, co-founder. What was that decision, and how did that come about?
Yeah. So again, it was accidental in many ways, but really fortunate. And what happened was, when we were negotiating the original LOI at Oculii, and again, this is coming from a place of inexperience, we signed the LOI thinking that the deal was done. And this was the first mistake. I think in in many years as a VC, I'm sure you've seen this play out a lot of times where the LOI is the starting point for negotiation. But even from that point where you've signed the LOI, there's a lot of things that have to go right between the LOI and closing of the deal, right? And nothing is done until it's done, right? And I think for me, I didn't have that experience, I didn't have that perspective, and I didn't have that mindset going into it. I thought LOI we're done, and I didn't have that perspective the first time around. So what happened was we had signed, with the first acquirer, the LOI. I had joined Kleiner, but at the same time, I was still helping with the due diligence and getting the business transition. What ended up actually happening was great for Oculii in hindsight, because the first acquirer that we talked to was actually this was actually the third acquirer that we had at Oculii. We actually turned down quite a few folks already, but the first LOI that we signed with this tier 1 automotive company fully convinced my father and the team that automotive was the right path, because we were starting to get a lot of interest from potential acquirers, from potential partners on commercializing the technology, not for speed enforcement, but for automotive perception. And this was 2016, 2017. I think Cruise was acquired around that time by GM as well. So the M&A market in that time period was starting to get pretty warm and heated. And there were a lot of potential suitors and opportunities for us at Oculii in the automotive sector. And so that kind of was the catalyst for my father and the team to say, hey, this is the right bet. We got to jump all into automotive. And it helped that the company that was about to acquire us was a supplier. They knew the specs of the sensors. They knew the performance that they needed to meet. They knew, what requirements would have to be in there for this to become automotive grade and a system that would be deployed commercially. So we learned a lot from that experience. But the company that had tried to acquire us, they used the LOI as a negotiating tool to kind of squeeze us down. I remember even when I was at Kleiner and ramping up and getting to start my life as a VC, the negotiation was dragging on and on and on. And so by the end of that year, I think end of 2017, the deal still hadn't closed. It'd been almost a year. And at this point, we kind of started to question, do they really want to get the deal done? Or is this, some type of negotiating ploy that they're going to, use to steal the IP or do something? And I think it was at the end of that year where they came back and they said, hey, remember that deal that we had on the LOI? That deal's off the table. Here's the new deal. And the deal was much lower. And, obviously at that time, it was a tough pill to swallow, because actually in that moment, it was actually one of my toughest times, because I felt like I'd let the whole team down, because it was me that had been negotiating this deal. I'd been the one putting the LOI together, handling the diligence. And partially I felt also responsible, because I had already thought it was a done deal and, kind of gone on to the next stage of my life when it wasn't a done deal, right? And so I kind of looked back and said, man, if I hadn't taken that job at Kleiner, maybe I could have done this better. And I was just racked with guilt, and it was a tough time. And I remember, at that period, we really didn't know what to do with the business at Oculii, actually. Because we had taken the LOI already, we'd kind of mentally said, we're going down this path of becoming an automotive supplier and focusing on automotive industry. We kind of let a lot of the existing business kind of, dry up, just because that wasn't our focus anymore, since we were about to be acquired. So, cash was starting to run low. We never really raised a lot of money, so we were always kind of hand to mouth, from a business perspective. And since there was no more food coming in from the existing business, the balance sheet was starting to dwindle. And I remember that Christmas, it was a tough time, when I went back that holiday to be with my father, just because he'd spent, many years working on the company. I felt like I'd taken him on this new path, and he was about to, end up in the ditch, and I felt really bad as well. And again, this is, I think, where the relationship between the founders is really important. I remember going back that holiday and feeling really bad, right? Feeling like I'd let my family and the company down. And I think my father could sense that, right? And in that moment, he came to me, and as a father, not necessarily as a co-founder, told me, hey, I'm proud of you, right? I know you did your best. I know you, worked really hard to make this really successful. And I know that the outcome, may not reflect that, but I really respect what you've done and really appreciate what you've done for the company as well. And that moment as a father, I think, really helped to give me a second wind, give me strength, give me the courage that was needed in that moment to, push ahead and think about what else we could do. I think without that moment of encouragement and guidance, I might have, given up, right? I think I still remember talking to my now wife about it. And, like one of my decisions at that point was, hey, I've already got this great job with Wen and Paul and the folks and Ruse and the folks at Kleiner. Maybe I stay on that path, right? And I remember my wife telling me that, that path and that part of my life would always be there if I wanted to come back to it. But that my father and the company needed me in this moment, and that, I should do my best with everything that I could to help them be successful. And so that was kind of like the mindset shift that I needed to really say, hey, like I'm gonna double down and try to make this successful. And that was like one of the most critical moments for us in the company, because that winter we had no money in the balance sheet. I think we had to furlough most of the staff. I still remember we pretty much told everybody, hey, we actually can't make payroll this month. Please work for us for free for a couple weeks or months while we figure this out. A lot of the folks, some of the folks left, right? Don't fault them at all. And the folks that stuck around, they worked for free for several months actually. We actually took money from our personal balance sheet and put it into the company, and tried to keep it afloat. And then that spring, I came back out to California, not as a VC, but as an entrepreneur, and hit the ground, and pounded the pavement looking for funding. It was a bit awkward, because I think at the time, like, I was still technically a full-time VC, but I was also trying to help this company, stay alive. But it ended up, again, being this amazing blessing in disguise, because throughout the, year and a half of already, working as a VC, I built up so many great relationships and, great network with folks that had begun to trust me, had begun to get to know me. And again, I'm really grateful for this, but, Paul, you and Conductive, Ruse at Catapult, a lot of the great folks that, were my peers in the venture capital world, when I came to you and told you what we were doing with Oculii, you guys jumped at the opportunity to invest in us and back us. And, for us, that was such a critical moment for us in our journey, that to have your guys' support, to have your guys' confidence, it was almost like, the second, win, the first win was, from the conversation with my father, but the second win was the support and confidence from, great investors and folks like you, that really gave me the confidence to say, all right, this is what I'm going to do with the next, decade of my life, and, leave the VC world to go run the company. And so I was just so grateful and blessed to have that opportunity to first come across you guys, and then also have you guys back us and support us in that moment. I think without that support, company would have looked very different. We probably would have had to sell the business for scraps, if anything at all. But once we were able to get the additional support and resource for you guys, and we knew now that automotive was the path for us, it was like a whole new company and a whole new, breath of fresh air for everybody. And from there, I think we really excelled and accelerated. So.
That is a really amazing story, especially with, call it the furloughing the employee side. It's never easy, because, I've been at 3 different startups. Employees start to feel like family.
Yeah.
And I can totally understand the feeling of, oh my gosh, did I just let my family, extended family, let all these people down? Was that the kind of the darkest moments of Oculii, if you will, the dark days before, before sunlight?
Yeah, definitely. I think, every business goes through these, oh crap type of moments. I think we definitely had, several of them. That was probably the toughest one, just because, for us as a business, we had a real business that we kind of abandoned in this search for a better business and in search for this new opportunity. And like we talked about at the beginning, it's almost like the immigrant journey, right? We're leaving something that was comfortable, that was home to us in search of a better opportunity. But at the beginning, when you're going to this new place, into this new market with, this team that's never been there before, everything is really, really difficult, right? And to have done that at the time when, we had to also deal with this transition on the, on the acquisition side falling apart, it was really challenging. But again, I would say that just like, when this was my experience as the child of an immigrant, when my parents first came to the U.S., they didn't do it on their own. They met great friends, great supporters, great people that helped them, become successful in this new country, that showed them the ways, that helped them on that path to, getting on their own 2 feet and building a foundation and growing from there. And I think we had a lot of that as we transitioned from our old business to our new business with folks like you and Conductive. And I think without this ecosystem and without this set of partners, it's really hard to build a business. It really does take a village. So when I look back at, how difficult it is to build a company and the kind of things that have to go right, I think a big part of it is having the right people, having the right, team members, having the right investors, having the right partners. At the end of the day, it's all about people believing that this can be possible and working hard towards it. But yeah, I would say that to get through those tough times, you really need to trust in the people. And, just to our team at Oculii, I think they believed in us, and they worked super hard, even though the path and the outcome was not for certain. And I'm really grateful to the whole team at Oculii and all the investors and partners that came along to have gotten us through that period.
That's amazing. Now, talk about kind of after you come out of that darkness and you're seeing the light, the sunrise, if you will.
Yeah.
And you were able to raise money to take this company into a very focused, automotive focused, technology company. And then what happened? Because it was fairly short time, or the time span wasn't that long before you got a call from Ambarella. Was the same feeling there of, you know what, I'm smarter now this time? Because the first time LI came, I was put all my eggs in that basket. Was this time different? Was it more like, you know what, I'm gonna be more careful about it?
Definitely. I mean, so I think from that period, from 2017 to eventually 2021, that 4-year period was, I think, a period of accelerated growth. I think once we got the investment from Conductive and other great folks, we really put our heads down and focused on automotive. And I think again, blessing in disguise, the acquiring company that the deal fell through with ended up giving us a roadmap on how to be successful in this market. Because I think, first of all, we realized that, to build hardware in this market was really hard. And there was this, really long and established supply chain that would fight it if we, tried to replace them. Because the company that's acquiring us was one of those companies. We'd be better off trying to partner with companies like the one that I just started acquiring. So it was a tier 1, rather than trying to compete with them building and selling hardware. And so that was the first transition and shift that we made. We said, hey, if this company wants to acquire us, I'm sure there's a dozen other that have similar products that would find our technology valuable and useful as well. So right after the deal fell through, actually, we went back with the confidence of your investment. We went back and said no to them, right? And we said, we're gonna stick it out and we're gonna build this business. It ended up being by far the right decision, just because there was so much opportunity for the technology that we had built that we immediately got a lot of traction with, different tier 1s and OEMs. And I think from 2017 to 2020, 2021, there was just this period. Actually, I'd say in that 4-year period, it was a lot of upward trajectory, right? We could feel the momentum. We could feel the market pull for our product and our technology. And I think the next thing that happened, obviously, was COVID, right? COVID hit. I still remember, I used to fly back and forth a lot between California and Ohio, and hit while we were in Ohio. And then, they shut down the country. My wife actually got pregnant at the time, and we were like, oh, looks like we're going to live in Ohio for the next couple of years. And it was actually a really great opportunity because it allowed me to really focus on the building aspect of it, the technology aspect of it. But in those 4 years, I would say from the outside, it looked like we were growing very quickly, and we definitely were, but it wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for the first, 4, 5, 6, 7 years that we had already invested in the foundation of the technology, of learning, of the failed acquisition experience going through. All of those taught us so much that by the time, 2017, 2018 rolled around, we knew what the market needed. We knew what the solutions out there were not able to provide. We knew what our value proposition was, and we were able to really execute and go after that. And so after 4 years of really, high growth and really successful commercialization, when we got approached again, actually we got approached by multiple companies at the time again. It was interesting because in my mind, having been through that experience one time with the first LOI, I knew this time that, LOI means nothing. Deal's not done until the deal is done. And so I think I learned you have to play through the whistle, right, a little bit. And even as we were, negotiating the LOI and even after the LOI had been signed and we were, negotiating the final close, we continued to build the business. We continued to, work on getting customers. We continued to work on, commercializing technology. We actually, at the time, had been in talks to also raise another round of financing, right? Because that period was the capital markets were definitely open. So we had a Series C discussion and everything going on as well. We definitely realized that, you have to play all the way through the whistle. The deal's not done until the deal is done. And again, we wouldn't have learned that lesson had it not been for the first acquisition, falling apart. And so I think many journeys are like this where, in the moment, you don't realize where you are in the journey and you think that this might be the end. This might be the pit in which you get stuck in, right? The trough of sorrow. But when you look back at it, you realize that all these moments had a critical place and such an important part to play on that whole journey, because without those moments, you wouldn't have had the strength, the experience, the fortitude to get all the way through to where you wanted to go. And yeah, I think I'm so grateful for all the experiences that we had along the way, but also I know that without those experiences, we wouldn't have nearly been as successful. So for us, I think it was just this full circle type of moment for us to get the deal done the right way. And I think along that journey, we had so much help from you and Conductive and the folks around the table that second time around, we had a lot more supporters as well, from negotiating the deal to also playing devil's advocate to whether or not we should even do the deal. That environment created a much healthier way for us to negotiate the terms that we wanted and get the deal that we wanted that we didn't have the first time around.
Well, actually, let's talk about that very specific point of whether to do the deal or not. At that moment, like you mentioned, Stephen, the capital markets were wide open, companies were going public. Yeah. If you were raising venture money, you were raising hundreds of millions of dollars at that time. And, it wasn't even that long before we invested. Yeah. So I still remember that was actually the biggest question around the table of, hey, do we actually go through with the transaction, or do we stay private? Let's keep going. Let's just heads down, execute. Again, having known you for so long and knowing the backstory, I still remember you bring up to the board a lot of new investors at that time were saying, wait, I just put money in you not that long ago. You want to exit now. Like, we still have so much runway. Put your head down, keep executing. And I still remember talking to you and I said, hey, Stephen, it's awesome that you got this term sheet. Take this weekend off. It was a long weekend. I said, take the weekend off. I have my own, feelings about the deal, but take the weekend off, really have call it just a one-on-one with your father, with Dr. Hong, and talk about what you want to do. And, Monday morning comes, for example, we said, or the next week, I said, just give me a call and you tell me what you and your father decide to do, and I will be supportive. I'm actually really curious, what did you discuss at that weekend retreat that I remember specifically saying, take the couple days off just to talk to your dad and see whether you want to do the deal. If you want to do the deal, I'm all supportive. If you don't want to do the deal, let's help you raise more money and let's keep going as a private company. So I'm really curious about what did you and your father talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we had a long discussion. I think, again, we maybe had a little bit of a different perspective as well. I think in that moment, like you mentioned in 2021, a lot of our competitors were, raising, several $100 million in large mega rounds. Several of them went public. I think the LiDAR companies were valued in the billions at the time. So there definitely was this enthusiasm around, autonomy and around perception technology that we almost got swept up and caught up in as well. And I remember that weekend, it was a lot of reflection by both my father and I, because I think the journey to being a successful public company is a very, very long one, right? I think both of us had realized at that time that in order to really get this commercial technology scaled, this couldn't be a 55, 60 person company. And that's around the size where we were when we had just raised a Series B, because we had just closed it in I think April or May of that year. So we had really not deployed the capital yet. We were like 50, 55 people. And we both knew that one way or the other, this company had to grow substantially and significantly in the right ways to have a chance at being successful. And I think, my father looked at it from a perspective of, this is another leg of the journey, right? It's no longer purely about technology. It's about commercialization, and it's about commercialization in a pretty tough industry in automotive that has really long sales cycles, right? And I think the way I looked at it was, for both my father and I, we'd been on this journey for quite a long time. My father, maybe even longer, with this being his research for almost a decade. In order to be a successful public company, I think we both had to have the mindset that this was going to be the next 10, 20 years of our life too. And I think both of us were very, very strongly open to that possibility. But we also knew that if we could have a partner come along and help us do a lot of that, not just a capital partner, but a strategic partner that had the reach, that had the customer relationships, that had the silicon that could help us optimize this, it would be a great pairing and a great opportunity for us to really commercialize and make this technology even more successful. So I think we came at it from that lens of knowing that we could keep it independent and continue to build the company, but also looking at it from the perspective of all the different options out there, what was the best path for us to make this commercially successful with the most support and resources? And then when we evaluated in those ways, we thought that the partnership with Ambarella, made the most sense. And so, I actually remember, talking to you and this is where it's so important to have great partners around the table. I had talked to all the investors around that period too. And like you said, a lot of them were new investors, and, maybe I didn't have the relationship that I had with them that I had with you, but a lot of the investors said exactly what you said. Hey, we just invested 2 months ago. Why are you in a rush to sell? Like, look at all these companies that have gone public, right? There's another 5x value in here. Let's keep going, right? And a lot of them flat out said, no, we won't support a sale, right? So it was actually, like, in my opinion, a bit of a convincing, thing that we had to do, right? To get, part of the board and the investor base to come along and say, hey, this is actually the best outcome for all of us, right? And I remember really appreciating the conversation with you, because you took off in that moment your investor hat and put on your partner hat and your friend hat, right? And saying that, whatever you think is the best outcome and the best decision, we'll support. And that's not the outcome, and that's not the response that you get from all investors, right? I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize this, but investors and entrepreneurs are not 100% aligned all the time, right? Investors have this opportunity to invest in many different companies, right? So they kind of diversify all of their options. So they want all the options to pay out and hit as big as possible. So they're willing to let it ride a little bit more. But for an entrepreneur, you're all in on one particular option, right? So it's like, playing poker with, the blind versus all in on every hand, right? So when you're playing all in, I think you got to be a little bit more careful about which hands to play, right? And which hands not to play. So I think, for us, we knew that this was a great outcome because we knew Ambarella would be a great partner. We knew we'd be able to commercialize the technology, but we also understood that there were risks and, challenges ahead. And by taking this outcome, we would, get the win. And I don't think all investors understood that, right? They only saw the upside and not the downside. And again, had we not had investors like you and Conductive and folks like Ruse and Catapult and Darren, I don't think our investor base would have allowed us to make that decision. And so, when I called you that Monday, I actually didn't know what your response would be. I know you had said you'd be supportive, but I was actually really grateful to hear your supportive response. And, in that moment, I knew that we had picked the right partners in Conductive Ventures and in you and Carrie. And I knew that I was really grateful for your guys' support. And even to this day, I think without your support and guidance up to that point, and even support all the way through, we could have had a completely different outcome that might not have been the best for everybody. So.
Thank you for the kind words, and I'll give all the credit to John Doerr, our former old firm's big boss. When I first started at Kleiner Perkins, he gave me some really amazing words of wisdom. One of the most important things that I take throughout my life is, hey, we're VCs. We're actually in the service industry. We're not investors. We're here to serve our entrepreneurs. And that was a amazing nugget of wisdom that I just took with me throughout my investment career. And as you can see from his track record, backing a lot of repeat entrepreneurs, that was the right thing to do, right? We're here to serve our entrepreneurs. If the company does well, great. Maybe they'll start another one and we'll get the first dibs and first chance to work with that person again. If it doesn't do well, but we still do the right things, they can tell their friends, they can tell their, other people, their maybe other entrepreneur friends to call us. Yeah. So that service attitude and servitude, if you will, it's just really carry with us throughout. And I know you learned the same thing. Yeah, definitely. Now that you are at, Oculii, from Oculii's perspective, now you're at Ambarella, love to hear about just, a couple minutes on what do you see now in the autonomous driving field. We're seeing fully autonomous vehicles that you can call Waymo in San Francisco now. What do you see in this industry? Where are we headed?
Yeah, no, it's really exciting time now. I think what's actually been really interesting is that this kind of wave of hype, right? And then this trough of disillusionment, and then actually the actual deployment phase, it played out exactly as people had drawn on the charts and the curves. Because I think, the 2016-17 period, there was a ton of hype. Autonomous cars are going to be around next year, year after. A lot of people made promises that they couldn't keep. And then there was this bust, right, that I would say lasted for several years, in maybe 21, 22, where there was a lot of disillusionment and a lot of companies ended up going under or being folded back. But I think if you look at the industry right now, there's a ton of really exciting momentum and progress that we're excited to be a part of, that really makes it look like, it's at the fingertips and all a matter of just timing, regulation, redundancy, and safety now for it to really be deployed. And so what's actually really exciting is that I think, our technology now with Ambarella is going into, millions of cars all the way around the world, different use cases, different applications, not all fully autonomous, because I think the transition to having a human out of the car and being fully autonomous still will take some time. I like to say this, right? But like even in a system that's like 4 nines or 5 nines of redundancy, that still means, pretty high chance of something catastrophic happening, right? And even in this situation where, you have 5 nines of reliability or 4 nines of reliability, you want 9 nines of reliability, 10 nines of reliability, right? And so for us, and I think the whole industry is seeing this as well, the way to get to that level of redundancy, that level of reliability really is redundancy. So I think what you're seeing is today, there's a lot of great AI technology being built around, single modality perception systems. Tesla's a great example of that, but there's still a lot of drawbacks, where, when you hit a particular visual condition, the system stops. And if you're not in the driver's seat to take over, that could be a catastrophic event, right? So redundancy, fusion, and kind of safety and scale of deployment, I think all have some time to ramp up and mature. But what I think we're seeing is even leading up to the L4 opportunities where the human is out of the loop, there's a ton of commercial opportunity today in L2++. They're adding pluses on, so it'll be plus for a while. That removes the need to have the human fully out of the loop, but the human is still there, but relatively passive and disengaged unless they're absolutely needed. And I think we're going to be in that stage for a while until the technology is more mature. But in that kind of L2+++ world, you have some flexibility on, 3 nines, 2 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines of reliability, right? And there's a chance for companies to get to the 6, 7, 8, 9 tens of reliability safely, slowly, and steadily because they're generating revenue and profits and cash flow from the L2+++ opportunities. So, for us, I think that's a, really exciting opportunity. And specifically for Ambarella, I think this is public, so I can talk about it. But what we're seeing is that there's quite a bifurcation between how Western OEMs, North American and European OEMs, think about commercialization of this technology versus Chinese and I'll say Chinese. Like the OEM mentality and mindset is completely different. So I think what we'll see in the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years is just this acceleration of growth, and a lot of it's driven also by competition. The Chinese OEMs are now becoming so competitive with their EV platforms that they're starting to eat into a lot of global market share, and that in turn gives them the opportunity to embed their data and collect information to train their AI systems more efficiently as well, and that in turn motivates the Western OEMs to move more quickly because they don't want to be outcompeted by these Chinese OEMs. So, for a company like Ambarella, we're actually at this great intersection point where, we're providing solutions to all these other OEMs in a price and cost and energy efficient price point that allows them to be commercially successful and compete against companies like Tesla. But we're doing it in a way that really enables them to still maintain their IP, still build their own differentiation, not make this a black box. And I think that kind of like open source like network allows the community to all come together to really accelerate the adoption of this technology. So it's really exciting times right now. We're really excited to be a part of Ambarella. But overall, like we couldn't have asked for better partners to go on the next stage of the journey with. And it's really exciting times right now in the world of automotive. So
That's fascinating. Last question. So you sort of briefly touched upon it. You touched upon on the AI systems. Is that what's most exciting to you right now, or what are some of the things that's really that's the most exciting for you in the near future, and where do you see us going from call it autonomous systems, anything outside of that really again excites you, that you're want to make you think about what's next?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's really the golden age right now of building, just because I think for so long, building technology has been gated to a certain extent by human labor, right? By the number of people that you could hire, right? The type of people that you could hire. And building a company really required getting massive scale in order to be successful and actually to serve customers at scale. So I think what we're seeing these days is that with a lot of the new technologies and the new services that AI are enabling, you're able to get such efficiency and such productivity out of your team that you may not need to have a 100,000 person organization to service a global customer base. You may be able to do this with 1,000 or maybe even a couple hundred, right? And small teams can actually build amazing products. I think that's what we're seeing even at Ambarella Oculii, where our team is still relatively small, but we're building these amazing products, but we're leveraging a lot of different AI tools. And I'm really excited for that, just because I think what it means is that there's going to be more entrepreneurship. It means there's going to be more ideas that people can try out and build. But at the end of the day, I think it makes every person in your company, every investor, every hire, every person even more critical, because that person is going to have 1,000 times leverage. So you got to make sure you got the right person, right? Both on the investor and on the team side, that the 1,000x leverage is in the right direction. That makes the company successful, right? So I think it actually makes the team even more important because you're hiring fewer people, so every person is more important. I think our experience with the whole journey was that it's all about the people. It's all about the right team. It's all about the right investors, the right partners. And I think that's even more true in this age of AI.
Hey, really, really appreciate
Definitely.
it. Thank you so much.
Definitely. My pleasure, Paul.
It was great.
Cool.
That was
Man, thank you so much.
No.
That's really exciting.
That's great.
yeah.
How long was that? 30?
An hour and
That was all
Wow.
right. Wow.
I'm sorry. sorry.
Perfect. Perfect.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Conductive Conversations. Join us next time for more interviews with CEOs, founders, and other movers and shakers in the tech industry. If you're listening, subscribe to our feed. If you're watching on YouTube, hit like and subscribe to our channel. Till the next one, thank you.